Okay, hi everybody. It is Monday Night Love Talks, which is a series of talks that I'm doing during the month of February, the month of love, and inviting different guests on to take on some different and exciting topics surrounding dating, love, and relationships. Tonight, we're focusing on falling in love, specifically getting into the nuts and bolts of the biology behind it and the psychology behind it and all of the beautiful messiness of it all. So joining me tonight is Nick Badminton. I'm going to throw it over to you, Nick, to kind of give us a little background on who you are and what you do.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Nick Badminton. I'm a futurist. What's a futurist? I look at trends, I look at culture, I look at society, I look at how humans are changing with all the technology that's hitting us in this world, and I make predictions about where we're going and how that's all changing. So what I do now for a living is I write and I speak. You can go to nikolasbadminton.com and you can see some of the things that I talk about, and it covers everything from the future of artificial intelligence and cars, autonomous cars, cities, people. I talk about sex and intimacy. Also, this is the first real big conversation I've had with anyone around love and thinking about where that could go, but also around the biology and psychology of love. So this is very exciting.
Yeah, this whole conversation kicked off, any of you that follow me on Facebook or catch up on any of the dating intelligence that I put out weekly, I had done a post on Facebook. Jason Silva, who's sort of a modern day philosopher, if you will, does these random posts, and he had done one specifically surrounding his issues with falling in love, and that the end of those dramatic feelings that you feel when you're still first falling for someone, that they wane, and his knowledge of death and that all things must come to an end dampens and sort of ruins the experience of falling in love and not subsiding after time, and that he's constantly chasing that high. So we're going to talk a little bit about what that high really is. And our discussion kicked off because we were weighing in with our own 2 cents, going back and forward, and decided it would be best to have a conversation about it because it's an interesting topic. So we talk about the romanticism that surrounds falling in love a lot, and everything from movies to poetry and everything else. But there's an actual real science about what happens, and that explains butterflies and not being able to sleep, and biological things that happen within you that are a result of falling in love, and why you get so hooked and a bit obsessive about the person that your new affection is for. So I know you have the people that you've been reading and are excited to hear the information that they share. You had mentioned to me that it was Mark Manson's work that you were really interested in, and some of the things that he had to share. For me, I'm a huge proponent of Helen Fisher. She has done leading studies actually specifically on chemistry, and talks about what happens to the body when we're going through that process of falling in love with someone. So I'll let you kick it off, Nick, on sort of Jason's dichotomy of falling in love and then knowing it's going to end, so he's constantly chasing the next person to get that high. What is that high?
Yeah, so this is really interesting, and having read a lot about this and sort of delving into this, and some of the anecdotes, and having lived my life experiencing love in very strong senses, it's a scary thing, right? I mean, chemistry and the way that our brain gets bombarded by all kinds of naturally produced chemicals, especially when we meet someone new and end up falling in love with them, it's absolutely terrifying. If you actually look at what happens. So, I mean, when Jason's where he talks about the Garden of Eden, and he talks about how he wants to continually live in that state, and that, like, if suddenly he falls out of that initial state of attraction and lust, everything's going to go wrong. And I think, I just wanted to kind of reach out to him and say, keep trying, buddy. Seem like you haven't quite met the right person yet. But let's talk a little bit about the stages of love anyway. So the generally held idea is there are 3 stages to love, and it's lust, attraction, and then attachment, which leads to longer term relationships. And that first stage is like you see someone, they're attracted, you're attracted to them, you meet them, you hug them, you actually smell them at that time as well, and the pheromones. And so some people actually say that we're more attracted to people with different kinds of immune systems and stronger immune systems than our own. So this is when the physiology and the chemicals start firing as well. But the first piece is testosterone and estrogen that gets launched in that lust phase. So pretty much like, wow, super attractive, got to talk to you, and you start talking to that person a bit more. So for the first couple of times you meet, you're probably going to be asking some qualifying questions and really, or maybe even not asking any questions at all, and getting really physical and getting really into it. And this is all very exciting. But that first stage of lust sort of very soon transfers its state into the state of attraction. Now, this is when you start to feel crazy about someone, right? Your brain is taken hostage. and I'm not joking here. This is when adrenaline, dopamine, and serotonin really kick into effect. And we all know what adrenaline, dopamine, and serotonin is. And I'll just replay some thinking behind that. So adrenaline, this is your stress response, right? So adrenaline and cortisol are kicking in. You start to sweat, your heart races, your mouth goes dry. We talk about adrenaline junkies, and this is where some people get addicted to the feeling of falling in love as well, right? And this is why a lot of people are like, oh, I just love that initial stage, because this is when our heart gets pumping. And then into dopamine and norepinephrine, and which gives you increased energy. It lessens your need for sleep or food. So if you notice, you can just go for longer and feel better, and your mind's somewhere else. And you've got focused attention. And then you take exquisite delight in the smallest details. So someone lightly touching you on the shoulder, saying hi in a text message, these things that really shouldn't be impacting you as much as it maybe should are going to make a big difference there as well. And then this is where it gets really scary, serotonin. So when you start to fall in love, your serotonin levels drop. And they drop to the level of people with obsessive compulsive disorder. So this is when you can't stop thinking about someone, or you want to see someone all of the time, or you just really want to connect. This is why when you haven't had that email or you haven't had that text message back, you start to overthink things. And this is hugely scary for a lot of people as well. And this OCD is probably something that people are really scared about as well. But if you look at what Jason Silver's saying, and he's saying this is the stage that I'm really into, well, there's some good news. You can actually prolong that stage, and I think you can prolong that stage for the entire length of a relationship. And I'm sure you agree with this as well. It's the idea of a relationship that can last for 50 years, and this couple's like wildly in love. Well, they've just mastered the idea that they can help produce dopamine, serotonin, endorphins, and everything like that, and just really, really kick in as well. So it's actually interesting. With dopamine, you can stimulate the production of dopamine by celebrating little goals that you have in your life, and they might be relationship goals, they might be personal goals in your personal life, or work goals, and celebrate them. And as soon as you achieve a goal, set a new goal so that you don't actually have that dip. That's a really important thing. Secondly, serotonin. A lot of people talk about reflection as being a very powerful tool, meditation. Well, this is where you can actually kick in with your serotonin. So think about your memories. Be thankful for everything. Call people. Tell them that you love them. This is where we can really make a huge difference. And then endorphins are really interesting as well here. Endorphins play a huge role in what we have to do. And you can even use like aromatherapy as well. So the smells of vanilla and lavender have been found to stimulate an endorphin reaction. And this is the good news. Dark chocolate and spicy food does too. so we can actually eat our way to
and so does sex, Nick. Let's talk about the big obvious one too.
Oh yeah,
maintaining an involved and connected sexual relationship. It helps fire those endorphins and also trips the dopamine as well.
Sure, absolutely. So I'm not going to forget all the fun stuff as well, right? I mean, but I was sort of holding off on the sex thing until, you know, attachment does come through you know, sex and connection and all these good things and feeding each other chocolate, you know, all that fun stuff. But when we get into the third stage, which is around attachment, I think this is when it really kicks into a high gear, because this is when oxytocin really comes into play. And what's really interesting, that the advent of more research into oxytocin came from the study of prairie voles. Have you ever heard of prairie voles at all?
Mm-hmm.
So prairie voles are mate for life. And they're monogamous and they're together, and it's great. And what they've actually found is huge levels of oxytocin within those animals as well. And if you look at couples that have been in love for a long time, oxytocin, or as it's known, the cuddle hormone, it still plays a very active part. And all of the physical and mental stimulus is there, but they can continually start kicking in all of the serotonin and dopamine to help the oxytocin take hold and really jump in. So this is where we deepen our feelings and we deepen the attachment as well. You know, this is where we nuzzle and we get really close. And then talking directly about sex, directly after sex, we release a hormone called vasopressin, and it helps us think about longer term commitments, and it works with your kidneys to control thirst. And yeah, this is another stimulus within the body that helps us really bond together. So all together, when we meet someone, when we start going on dates, when we start having sex with them and more intimate relationships, when we start sharing more intimate details about us, our mind is taken hostage and we're being bombarded with a whole bunch of different chemicals as well. And really, that's scary. And I think, speaking from a man's perspective, because men can often struggle with the idea of vulnerability and, you know, and weakness as being positive steps in their lives. This is where men are like, I can't deal with this. I must continue to protect myself. Oh, you know, I can't really take that step forward to develop the relationship because it's so easy to suddenly lose that chemical stimulation, or they don't even let the stimulation actually happen in the first place.
Right. Well, I know oxytocin specifically is more of a hormone that is affecting women, specifically after postcoital. Women are flooded with oxytocin, and the whole biological reasoning behind that is to have attachment because you want to procreate. We are built to fall in love. That's the coolest thing about human beings in total, is that we're actually built to fall in love. So this flooding of hormone into the brain is what helps establish that connection, which I think is an automatic and almost unconscious thing that people can do if they're connecting with someone that they resonate with. But I love how you touch on the sustainability of it. And that's where I think you and I agreed when we were going back and forth about Jason's professions, because I think everything that's worth having is worth effort. But if you can do it smartly and how to ignite and tap into your body as well to maintain those feel-good emotions, then you're that much further ahead. So, you know, I talked about sex being the fun part about keeping dopamine going and giving you that high, which, by the way, with Helen Fisher's studies, you are firing in the same part of the brain and being flooded with the same high that you get when you do cocaine when you fall in love. It is the exact same replica in the brain as to what happens. So you wonder why people get so obsessed and connected with it. Now, sex, fun part and keeping that dopamine going, but oxytocin is just generally known as the feel-good hormone that floods the brain. And you can do those simply through touch. You mentioned it earlier. Hugging actually someone and holding a hug for up to 30 seconds, which until you do it, you don't realize how incredibly long that is a way to release that hormone into the body. It is a long time. Yeah. But if you're doing it with someone that you care about, it doesn't seem like such a long time. You talked earlier about like pheromones, people's aroma and smell. I mean, we now produce things to attract people outside of our own, but we do produce something ourselves that are aligned with different people, and they haven't been able to figure that out yet. Match.com, interestingly, hired Helen Fisher specifically to see if she could figure out the science behind what chemistry actually is. And that's how they did the basis of doing chemistry.com. She hasn't completely figured it out, but she's figured out some other really interesting things, which I can share as we go along. Because I know you and I talked earlier before the talk about the importance of compatibility. Right. And that's where Mark Manson's work comes into play. So you can have those lustful feelings and have that connection to someone. And that might be something that wanes if these other things aren't established as a foundation to maintain that connection with someone. So, but you talked about pheromones. I want to touch on what happens in your saliva even. Not very romantic, but when people kiss, that exchange, especially with women, their body chemistry changes at different times of the month and sends hidden messages to the male body that they may not even be aware of, which can heighten that connection or feeling with another individual. It also is another release of oxytocin, so it's feel good and it helps with attachment as well. So being affectionate with the person that you're initiating a connection with, and you're wanting to get past that sort of spiked high of connection and falling in love and rolling into a relationship that has some longevity in love, are really key in helping sustain those things. Now, I know you were quite enthusiastic about the work that you had read about that Mark touches on, about compatibility. So let's dig into that a little bit. We're going to share a lot of information with all of you. If any of you have a question and you want to pop on or you have your own 2 cents, please don't hesitate in doing so. You can pop them over into the question box on the left-hand side. Or if you're feeling bold and you want to get into the convo, then hop on to the open seat and we'd love to have you participate as well. So go ahead, Nick, and share a little bit about what Mark's basis in his studies is about.
I'm fairly new to Mark Manson's work. He's a blogger. He's incredibly insightful. He's a very modern man and shares a lot of thinking. And he's also got a very good way of looking at the world. And he sort of splits things out. And I had a moment last year when I just got into a new relationship, and it was like firing on all cylinders. But very soon it was very clear to me that there was something that while all the body chemistry that I was going through seemed to be making a lot of sense, and it's my brain was taken hostage. That something wasn't right, and this person emailed me this article about compatibility and love, and it's called "Love Is Not Enough," and it's the idea that you can be in a relationship that there's not abusive necessarily or terrible, but you're just not built to go together. Your lifestyle's completely off. You might be at different life stages. You might want completely different things. You might find each other like hugely attractive and want to hug, kiss them, throw them into the bedroom every time you see them, right? But at the same time, it's not enough. So what you have to realize is you sit down and what I was doing was I was writing huge lists, and it was like, what do I want? And I think that this is what a lot of people need to do. And you need to reflect, what is it that I actually want in my life? Because really, love isn't enough. I've been married before, and I married a very wonderful person, and they're still here in Vancouver, and we're very good friends still. And it took a long time to be good friends, but we spent 8 years together, and I loved her deeply, and she loved me deeply. We're hugely incompatible. If you met us today, you'd be like, when people find out that we were married, that know both of us, they're completely gobsmacked because they can't even begin to see how the hell we could have even operated in a very good functional marriage. And we were amazing friends. There was a huge, deep love and affection there, and she's a wonderful, wonderful person. But the bottom line was that compatibility wasn't there. And after I ended that relationship, I went to do therapy and a number of other things. I realized that actually I completely lost my innocence. And I think what people need to do, men and women, they need to lose their innocence. They need to realize that there are some functional mechanical elements of relationships that we need to pay very close attention to. And Mark Manson talks a little bit about, the way that we can see compatibility as being an incredible way of thinking. Now, what's turned out for me is I've ended up going back with my now girlfriend, and I dated her before, and we both went our separate ways because we got to a point where we loved each other dearly, but we were hugely incompatible with each other at a certain point in time. And now we realize that we're hugely compatible, but that's because both of us disappeared off, went through a huge period of reflection and understanding, and then rebuilt our friendship and realized that we were crazy about each other still. So that's wonderful. So that's what I really wanted to talk about. And this is, this is when I'm going to speak from a guy's perspective, because guys are terrible at this. So Jason Silver talks about the Garden of Eden and how he wants to live there. Unfortunately, guys live in the Garden of Ego, and we let our ego take over. Hey, we're the hunter-gatherers. We're going to go out as soon as we're stuck at home, cooking the dinner and having the soft side, and actually being conscious men, wanting to actually, get in touch with our feminine side and really start to provide in a very different way, emotionally and through vulnerability and honesty. That's when it gets really tough. So I think that when you go back and you start reflecting, I've started writing a lot, and I've started writing a lot about how I feel, and I talk about feeling all the feels when you're really in the depth of a terrible situation. Really understand how much you can let yourself go, but you have to work that out on your own. So start writing out lists of what is it that I want, and don't write lists of, what do I want a girl to look like, or what do I want someone to give to me, because no one's going to give you anything. You have to give it to yourself, right? So compatibility starts with a reflection and you writing down exactly what is it you want, and then when you find that person and the attractions there and everything like that, you can start qualifying that relationship. And this is, I think it takes about 2 to 3 months. And this is why so many people have relationships that last, 2 to 3 months in length, because it does take time to get intimate. What I do love is that there's connection and attachment and bonding that happens the more that we disclose about each other. And you're either going to get deeper and more affectionate towards each other as we learn more about what we believe, or we're just going to be slightly repulsed, and then our brain, we start taking back our brain, and all these huge feelings start disappearing, because we're just doing the natural selection, and we're looking at moral and ethical boundaries as well. And you're probably aware of the 32 question test that's been flying around the internet.
The eye contact.
Yeah, so 32 questions. It's in 3 parts. You get deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper about everything, about like, who do you not want to die is one of the really heavy questions towards the end. It's like, who are you afraid of losing? And then what you do is you do these 32 questions. You look someone deeply in the eye, and you do that for 4 minutes. Now, that's terrifying for most people. But what's interesting is it's terrifying for 3 minutes, and then around about the 3 minute mark, and we really don't know why, it sort of kicks into something that can be something special. And hey, if you're at 3 minutes, 3.5 minutes, and into 4 minutes, and it's just not working for you, then there's a basis for having that conversation about, no. So that's interesting. So that's they've done a series of studies on that, and a number of people have gone out and tested that and sort of guinea pigged people through that process, because what they were proposing is that if you went through those series of questions and you did that face on face, which typically for a lot of men is very uncomfortable, they'd rather be here than here, and doing the eye contact, that you could actually incite feelings of falling in love. So there's a huge basis in what you're sharing, and the importance of connecting with someone and get from that place of vulnerability and being able to share fully and completely who you are, and then making the decision on that sharing of information back and forth when you can decide it is or is not a good fix. I mean, physicality and the lust and everything else behind it is wonderful, but if there's not a foundation underneath that, that's huge. And I know even in the work that I do, when I'm putting together dinner parties, the whole point of me doing one-on-one time with my clients before I even get them out is for me to get to know more who they are. And I probably ask much more in-depth questions than someone would
thank God, on their first date. But it's for me to get an understanding of what's important to them and where their beliefs lie and where their values lie and what they're really wanting out of life, which people aren't always really prepared to do, even in the initial several dates or initial weeks of dating. And I think that's really key in figuring out if you can see through sort of the brain freeze of all of the chemicals that are being flooded with you with that physical connection, to seek out and build that foundation with someone and see if it is long lasting. Really, really important. And I think it's important that he touches on that. I'm going to segue a little bit and dig even a little bit deeper with compatibility and bring you back to some of Helen's work. So she's written a great book based on her studies that she was doing for Match.com called Why Him, Why Her? And what she realized through her research and studies is that we are initially flooded with hormones when we're in vitro. And then we can be secondarily influenced when we go through puberty with a flooding of hormones. And the dominant hormone that floods you during those times is what helps to develop and create almost a personality type. So she files them away into 4 different categories. There's more testosterone driven. So you'll see people that are more chiseled in their features, stronger, harder jaw lines, high cheekbones. They're just more sharp in their edges and their physicality. And they're called directors. And directors are very ambitious, driven people. They tend to not have much of a filter when it comes to sharing their opinion. They're very blunt and straightforward, direct, which can prove some challenges with being in relationships with people that tend to be maybe a little bit more emotionally based and sensitive. And then you have people that are more serotonin based, and they're called builders. And builders are 9 to 5 people. They are tradition bound. They love routine. They typically want to get married early and have a family, and they're happy to fulfill a role in a job and be very this about things. And then there is the dopamine, and those are the explorers. These are the people that love to throw themselves off buildings, out of planes. They constantly have to be engaged in something exciting. They want that thrill and rush of endorphin and adrenaline in their bodies. They tend to have multiple partners. They're not always the most monogamous of people. They like to travel and be excited with different things happening all the time. And then finally, there is the estrogen base. And those individuals, you can see, they tend to have a little softer faces, larger, gentler, kinder faces, softer, rounder features, the basis of the estrogen. And they're more emotionally driven. They are the sensitive people. They want to have the deep conversations. They want to connect on a different level. They're not direct. They will run themselves around the rose bush, I don't know how many times, before they'll get to the point of very gently telling you that they might have issue or a concern with something. And interestingly enough, compatibility-wise with her work, is that explorers do best with explorers because they're both seeking that high and can share that together. That builders are best with builders because they want someone dependable who loves routine, is going to be there when they get home, are great to raise children, loyal and dependability. But the fascinating part is that typically directors do best with negotiators, which are the estrogen-driven people. So this is when you have that counterbalance. Someone who's direct, but they are highly monogamous individuals, both negotiators and directors, and they counterbalance each other. And I know if you start reflecting about some of the people that you have in your life, you'll start to see that that person's that person and that person's like that with how they interact in the relationships that they have. But she also mentioned that those are the best cases for compatibility, but there's always exception to the rule. And I think that's when you're doing the foundational emotional work with someone that you're interested in to find out if you could even bypass biology a little bit to get to the root of what you're wanting to build and establish a relationship on. And you mentioned it earlier, Nick, the importance of doing your self-work and also taking the time with each person to make that investment to see if it's worthwhile to get you through that fall in love phase.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting when you talk about these different types of people. And I start thinking, which am I? Which am I? You know, I think I'm a director, but what's interesting is I flirt with all of the others as well, right? I love the idea of providing and building. I love the idea of exploring, but I know that in both of those cases, I'm not wildly at the end of the spectrum towards that. You know, onto estrogen as well. You know, it's kind of interesting when I start thinking about previous relationships and the relationship I'm in now. That you know, it's very difficult. I actually think that directors that suddenly find themselves in relationships with directors, I think that's a really, really tough time. It's really very difficult. And I don't know if there's any part of the research that shows that. But I do think that this is when we can start to buck the trend around what psychological research can show us and actually do work to maybe start exploring the other sides of things. And I think this is where reflection and catharsis sort of plays a role. And this is where a lot of people, this is why people get addicted to certain drugs or certain feelings that they get from illegal substances as well. Because suddenly you can, you know, I'm talking theoretically here, you can go away and take something that's got MDMA in it and flood your brain with serotonin. And suddenly you've gone from a director to someone that's like heavy estrogen, but like a builder as well. And suddenly the community comes back. You can do something like DMT and suddenly realize that you're a huge part of the community, but you're a leader, but you're a huge part of the community, but you're everywhere and nowhere. And this is what's interesting about our modern society is we're looking for ways to try and buck the trend that we find ourselves with, the condition that we find ourselves with from teenage years, right? I mean, I suffered with post-traumatic stress disorder for 32 years, and I got that fixed with some therapy called EMDR, eye movement desensitization reprocessing, and that unlocked a huge amount of potential for me. I was definitely a director. I was definitely the guy pushing forward. But at the point about 3 years ago, when almost exactly to the week, 3 years ago, I released the anxiety and stress that I had, the OCD that had been controlling my life, and a number of different things. I realized that I could actually have that looseness to be able to explore other parts of personality and to actually, you know, tell people that I love them a little more and to get close. I didn't tell my mother that I loved her before 3 years ago. How crazy is that? You know, but that's because we do put these hard boundaries around ourselves. But it's interesting what you say around those four definite types as well.
Well, and there's sub-personality types. So I know for myself, in my youth, I'm a full-blown negotiator, card-carrying through and through. I know that about myself, sensitive, emotional creature, and I want those deeper connections with people. I don't do surface well. I've made peace with that, and it's something that I wear on my sleeve. But I know that I was more builder-based in my youth. I wanted that sort of security and routine and everything else. And part of that still resides within me, but I've lent more into more exploration and more risk-taking and everything else, which comes to the more explorer side. So anyone that's out there and is listening and you want to learn a little bit more about Helen's work, because it's really fascinating. And then she actually goes into how each person from those different personality types sort of meld well together and the things to be aware of within your relationship that you might run into, or the things that you can really celebrate and nurture. The book's called Why Him, Why Her? And she puts you through a quiz as well. So you can go through the questions and actually find out where you really lay, because you might, after hearing me talk or listening to any of her TED Talks, think, oh, I'm for sure this. But then when you go through the questions, you might discover that you're a little more heavily something else that you weren't even aware of. Because Nick, I know you and I have talked about this before. A lot of us, especially when it comes to romantic relationships, because it can be a scary place to reside when things are new, we're not always making decisions very consciously. We sort of, get taken away on this wave of flood of hormones and chemicals in our brains, and we're not necessarily making conscious decisions. So when you have a higher level of awareness and you can, as odd as it is to say this, make the statement, educate yourself in the means of romance and love and connection, you're just that much better to navigate your way through it successfully.
Yeah, I think also owning your story kicks in here as well. And yeah. I'm gonna quote Brené Brown, again, very famous TED person. I won't say TED fellow because I find that a little bit too gender specific. But Brené Brown actually says this: owning our story can be hard, but not nearly as difficult as spending our lives running from it. Embracing our vulnerabilities is risky, but not nearly as dangerous as giving up on love and belonging and joy, the experiences that make us most vulnerable. Only when we're brave enough to explore the darkness will we discover the infinite power of light. And this sounds very new agey, but when you actually go through this and you do some personal work, you realize that, wow, yeah, if you actually sat in the room and, you know, you're not like halfway through a bottle of wine again and you're doing some reflection and life starts to make more sense, and you realize that warts and all, you are a product of the people that you've met, the relationships that you've had, the schools that you've been to, the jobs that you've had, and whatever. You can actually decide, you know, to take control of that and to help redefine what the story is as well. And for me, over the past 3 years, it's been about really working out what I've wanted to do. I've ended up in a situation where I work for myself because I found that jobs and control in that situation doesn't work for me very well. I've also realized the kinds of relationships that I need, and they need to be like wildly adventurous, and they need to be incredibly like grounded as well, but also driven towards, you know, certain goals, and those goals have to be shared. So it's really interesting. And I've personally learned a huge amount about vulnerability. And this is the scary thing. When you become your most vulnerable, there's probably a period of 1 to 2 to 3 months when you really have to watch out, because you'll suddenly start finding the world to be an amazing place. You'll find more people to be attractive. You'll find that to be more optimism and more opportunity, but you're also more susceptible to accept things that aren't necessarily an amazing fit. So that's just some advice that I've sort of learned in the past sort of year or so, really.
Yeah, well, vulnerability is key. You know, a lot of people, men specifically, are raised that it's a weakness, showing that softness or exposing yourself. And I truly believe it's a superpower. So when you can tap into that and start practicing and sitting in the discomfort until that starts to stave and go away, I think that's when things really start to flow. And not only do you see other people as being more attractive, but you become more attractive. Yeah. Because you're more accessible. And what's more attractive than someone that owns and is comfortable with who they are, which really can be the basis of what vulnerability is, which so many people are not prepared to do. Yeah. We're getting a little bit of comments on the side. Yeah. Nick's vulnerability comment resonates. That's great. And other people are saying work that you can do that help tap into that is Kundalini yoga, is what Todd is saying, which is fantastic. That's a great suggestion. Any other things that you've done or experienced that's really helped for you tap into that? Okay, for me, so this is when things get a tad controversial. So over the past year or so, I've become very interested in the modern field of, it's not so modern, but it's becoming more relevant in discussions of the use of psychedelics to help attack the ego and help you realize who the hell you are, what's wrong, facing up to some challenges that you have, but realizing that you're actually a smaller part of a much bigger ecosystem, but you're a welcome part of that as well. So people have used a lot of things like psilocybin and magic mushrooms or MDMA. And MDMA has even been used in the treatment of PTSD. It's also been used in relationship therapy as well, because, you know, it floods the brain with serotonin. It makes you feel love. It makes you feel stronger. It makes you connect in different ways. It helps you directly navigate your way through some tough times. And something like psilocybin helps you just look at everything in the face and all the warts and all. And people are also talking a lot about using a ceremony that's very famous and popular down in Peru, a ceremony with ayahuasca, which is sort of a viscous tea that you drink, and it's got DMT in it, and you go on a 4 or 5 hour journey. And I've chatted to a lot of people that have gone through that, and suddenly they find themselves having long conversations with their parents,
or they're looking at their abusers in the face, or they're having some really tough times. So there's actually a lot of people right now that are realizing that these something like MDMA is actually like chemically synthesized. Something like ayahuasca, psilocybin are actually born in the plants that they come from, and are reached in various ways. These are things that are going to become more in the modern toolkit of people trying to break through with vulnerability. And something like ayahuasca was used by Dr. Gabor Mate down here in the downtown east side in Vancouver to help people fight addiction, and that actually works quite well. He can't do that work now. The government of Canada stopped that because obviously this is illegal activity, and you can't actually do these
mental illness issues as well, as they're using psychedelics to do a lot of treatment there as well.
Yeah.
So would you think that it's predominantly because it's breaking down barriers? It's funny, we bring it, we're kind of coming back to Jason again. He speaks about it all the time, about being able to tap into your creativity and fully express yourself, and maybe tap into that more readily, into that light that Brené speaks about. So do you think it's more of like a washing away of barriers that it's allowing you to do that? Have you read any more on those studies with regards to psychedelics?
I think what it is with psychedelics, it's a lot of it is a refocusing of your attention. Suddenly the things that have been hidden or you haven't wanted to look at, you suddenly get back to. So psychedelics, if I look at PTSD, and it's something that I experienced for a very long time, EMDR actually turned me on to the idea that the brain's fairly plastic and can be sort of reconfigured. And we sort of took a very traumatic memory that I had, which is of my sister dying, in the aftermath of that. And I was only 8 years old, which is a pretty terrible thing. And then through tapping and making the brain go into a dreamlike state, realizing that there are some distinct points in your life that are related to that beginning point, and that once you actually realize that your anxiety levels turned down from like 10 down to 4 down to 3, you can actually then say, hey, I'm going to plug in something positive. In my particular case, it was around, you can do anything, sort of it's like the spiritual high five. And I had a final session, like 4 sessions in total, tapping on my legs and just like making my brain go side to side. I opened my eyes and the world seemed completely different. And that was the beginning of my journey there. And what's really interesting, if you look at that, they still don't know exactly how that works. But if you start to look at more and more research, the brain actually releases DMT when you're in rapid eye movement. When you sleep, it makes you dream, but in very, very small amounts. Because when people take large amounts, it's a pretty crazy trip. So, we can actually start bringing together like spiritual ritual back into science as well, and science explaining some spiritual ritual. And what's interesting about all of these things is some people actually think that thousands of years ago, when people started realizing that herbs and plants and vines and all these things had magical properties, it was the birth of modern religions. So it's kind of interesting. So, I'm not coming from a hard scientific fact with this conversation, but what I'm trying to do, and this is what I do with futurism, is I try and just draw parallels between, things that have happened in society and things that can actually come back together as well, really. So it's interesting. We can do a lot of work.
Well, and finding what works for you. I mean, while you've been speaking, there's been lots of lovely suggestions in the panel box, everything from meditation to yoga. Todd's just shared a great video that I think speaks directly to what you were just sharing. But I think the common denominator there is searching and looking and coming back to the big foundation. And certainly what I preach is doing your own work. And if being in a place so that when you are, you're more ready and able to be in a position to fall in love and take it from that initial stage into something that's more lasting and meaningful. And I think that's so, so very important, because when you're in a place where, or if you do reflection upon your relationship history and you see things that have not worked or dysfunction and everything else, a lot of the time we like to lay that blame at other people's feet. But but the common denominator there is us. So when you start taking the look and being more inventive or imaginative, or even just curious about yourself and using different means to tap into that, I think will give you better opportunity and success in being able to connect effectively with someone else as well. And aligning yourself with someone that matches you in being in the same place. Because I truly feel that if you've done your work and you're living that authentic life, then you're going to attract that same individual. And if the wrong ones do come along, you'll be able to recognize them right away.
And what's interesting, when you're quite closed about yourself, but then you suddenly meet people that you in relationships or very fledgling relationships that are willing to share some of their darkest secrets. I always used to find it terrifying. You know, you'd find out all sorts of things, like whether it was a medical condition or whether it was some trauma that they had when they were younger, or, you know, just how they were feeling, or how they were like careering towards motherhood. And this was really important. And now I realize that these people had just done a ton more work than I had, right? So, I mean, I think that there's something to be said about the work that you do. Evs Wong actually mentioned here, attending love workshops as your significant other. And thanks for saying that, Evelyn. That's my girlfriend, and we're taking a step forward, and in a couple of weeks we've got a 3 or 4 hour workshop that's yoga based. There's Kundalini in there, there's music. Awesome. There's going to be a lot. It's really, but if you would have said that to me 3 years ago, I would have been like, you're crazy, I'm not doing that. Even a couple of years ago. But like now, when you realize that there's nothing to lose, and you've just got to be, you can actually step up and realize that something great can come from it, even if it's like a realization that there's actually not a lot, there's some parts that just aren't good and you need to do some work. It's a wholly, enriching experience. And this is where connection and bonding comes in as well, because that person that you're with, and you realize that the compatibility and the love is there, you're going to release a ton of like serotonin and dopamine and adrenaline and everything in those situations, because you're going to be doing a ton of stuff you haven't done before. And we're being led by someone that's incredibly fantastic as well, and happy to share information. But, you know, these things, and I talk about being a conscious man, and you can go and Google what a conscious man is, but it's someone that's happy to recognize his feminine side, to recognize that there's more to him than just being the warrior and just being the hunter-gatherer. So someone that can be open and talk about their feelings. I mean, we're 47 minutes into a conversation, and if you would have played this to me three years ago, and I would have just probably poured myself another glass of wine and sort of held my hand in my, my head in my hands, right? But now that there's something when you realize that vulnerability and strength, and being conscious, and realize that every day is not great. There's some tough times, and do you know what? If you are having a tough time, there are ways to get through it. And while we can't time travel beyond the tough times or go back and change something, we can certainly affect who we are today. And with my life, I look at today and then I think about the future. I barely think about what happened in the past as well. And I think we need to do that more too.
Yeah, a letting go and a forgetting and making peace with things is huge, because you can't move forward if you're still replaying the same story over and over again. You'll just inevitably end up attracting that back into your life. So I fully believe in that as well. Well, it's great. We're getting some shares on the side here. Is this your lady that's sharing the Elephant Journal article? That's fantastic. And a little shout out. Yeah. A little shout out to another Vancouverite, someone who's doing some really great work for men. If you're in the Vancouver area or in BC, is Connor Beaton. He does Man Talks, and it's all about tapping into, owning your vulnerability and being a conscious man. And I had the pleasure of being at one of his most recent talks, and the 3 men that got up on stage couldn't have been more vulnerable. Right. And a room of 180 people, and emotion was flowing, and they stood their ground and shared what they needed to, even through tears. And you don't always get to see that, because unfortunately young men still, to this day, it's changing. I think people are waking up and it's changing, but still that level of emotion being shared is not always celebrated or supported. So it's another person doing great work in our very own city. Yeah, I want to also share Mike and Andy Zaremba, a couple of brothers, and I met Mike
last year at some time. But I met them because they're the guys that started Float House, right? The sensory deprivation tanks. Have you done that? Have you done floating?
I have. Amazing.
Yeah. So it's tough for the first time, and you're just like, what the hell is this? And I am pretty tall. You're tall as well. And you're like bouncing around in the float tank and wondering what's going on. The second time I went in, I was super tired emotionally as well as physically. And I actually took some guided meditation. So they played some music. And holy moly, it took me to a lot of different stages. And it kicks in like the theta waves in your brain and just really, really mellows you out. It's a great place to process as well. So I've just shared a link here to vancouverreal.tv, which is really interesting. So go and check that out.
Yeah,
and they're very, very conscious guys. And they're great believers in the use of psychedelics. They're great believers in the use of experimental techniques. They're actually really old, but becoming more popular now to sort of hijack the ego. You know, massage that ego, but don't make it bigger. Massage it down so it's smaller and controllable, right?
Mm-hmm. So let's maybe bring things back around to where we started.
Sure.
So after watching that video that started all the discussion that Jason had posted, what would be your advice? Because he said he's still trying to figure it out. He opened that Pandora's box. Yeah. He's aware about the end of things, and it's plagued all of his relationships.
Sure.
So with all the work that you've done and that you continue to do, what advice would you give him?
Right, okay. And this is advice for anyone, and like male, female, whoever. I actually think you need to stop and you need to look at your life and try and do this, right? Try and drop caffeine out of your diet. Try and drop meat out of your diet. Try and sleep more. Try and drop alcohol out of your diet. If you smoke, give up smoking. Try and get rid of everything that directly affects how the brain works. The things that we're addicted to, the things that are sometimes fun, stop it, right? Once you start getting into that state, start writing every day. And it doesn't have to be a lot, but maybe in your writing, you can be creative. But what I do say is ask yourself one question every day, or write down one fact from your life every day. And do this for between 30 and 45 days. You'll soon see the effects after a couple of weeks anyway, but really push through and actually sit down and start to realize that there's a lot that you haven't covered and a lot that you can be very, very real about. And because you're not being hit with, you know, that glass of wine or, you know, that third cup of coffee or whatever, suddenly the clarity returns. And start like doing some yoga and stretching and exercise and all this stuff. And, you know, again, if I would have told myself to do this 3 years ago, it's like, I'm having a great time. Why do I need to do this? It's not a great time. It's a crappy time for 2 or 3 days after the great time, right? And what you'll realize is that you can actually get a grip on situations that you've never thought you could actually get a grip on. And you can use it, what I call accelerators. So yoga, your friends, you know, hug your friends. Tell your friends that you love them. Tell your parents that you love them. I tell my parents that I love them every time I sign off on Skype. And my parents don't know this, but I actually do screenshots of my parents every time I Skype with them, right? Because I like to have a memory. It's interesting. So do these things. Use the accelerators. And hey, if you're really lucky to have someone really special, you know, share something incredible with them every day, and never be afraid to show them how much you actually love and care for them, really. And, you know, and ask for help, because there's going to be some days when you're so low and you don't know where to go, or you've had a crappy day at work, or one of your friends has upset you. You know, reach out to someone, and don't do it on text message. Pick up the phone and have a phone conversation, or go for a cup of tea. You know, text messaging will really screw with how your brain works as well, right? Because you know, the anticipation and adrenaline, dopamine, and all those things get affected.
Or so misunderstanding.
Really, yeah. So it's like stop and withdraw from life a little bit. And do you know what? If you need to go away for a week to kickstart that, and just go camping or reconnect with nature, or just get out of daily life, then do that. Because what you'll realize is that there's something very special. And after that 30 to 45 days, try not to drop back into the old terrible habits, especially, you know, say if you're a single guy or a single girl and you go out on a first date, don't go out to the pub and drink like 4 glasses of wine. It's not a good idea. Again, you're going to get hijacked by that experience. Be very real. Go for a walk with someone, connect with them. You'll soon realize whether it's going to work or not. The amount of times that people end up creating relationships off of social situations that are actually got the wrong kind of stimulants is very scary. So yeah, stop, reflect, use those accelerators and level up, and really, read some of the things that were published here by the people attending the call, especially around being a conscious man. Because once you look at yourself in the mirror and you realize that that vulnerability and weakness can actually be huge strength for what you want out of life, you're going to actually find that people come to you, and the right kind of people come to you, and that's an amazing thing.
Absolutely. I 100% agree. We're coming close to the end. I want to open up to the floor to anybody that wants to jump on and share any of their insights or questions that they might have for either one of us. I've seen some notes popping up along the side. It's great to see a lot of people that are aligned with the same thinking, and great suggestions. Another accelerator I think is great that's been mentioned a number of times is meditation. Jill's just popped on and said it's time of year to do this. Energetically, we're really supported in this. So I know we're really blessed in Vancouver with a wonderful community of people that do this work and want to get involved in supporting others in it. So if you do a little homework, it's fairly easy to find. And I'm sure there's accessibility for you wherever you might be in the world. I have had a question pop up over here. What are your thoughts on accepting lust as it appears versus waiting for the right perfect one? What do you think, Nick?
What do I think? Well, this is the conundrum, right? It's like, oh yeah, I'm waiting for the right one. It's kind of tough. Again, our bodies are getting hijacked. As guys, I'm going to speak about this from a male perspective because I think it's fundamentally different to how women would approach this. You lust. And stimulants like drink or even looking at people. This is what happens in Tinder. You get kicked into this higher state of like, yes, oh my God, look at her, like she's super attractive, she fits everything, blah blah blah. You go on a Tinder date and you sleep with that person on the first night, theoretically. It's like accepting lust. Yeah, sure, you can accept lust. You need to, if you do accept lust and that other person's accepting of lust, and you can say, do you know what, this is who I am today, and this can be a lot of fun. Cool. But realize that it's a very sort of dangerous thing to play with. Now, waiting for the right one and the perfect one, well, do you know what? You're going to actually have lots of feelings of lust and have a lot of fun, and then you're going to realize that a lot of those people aren't necessarily the right one. That doesn't mean that you've done a bad thing. It just means that you've had a lot of fun. But what you'll find is you'll find someone that you've got a huge amount of lust for, and then the attraction goes so deep that it's amazing, and then you end up like in longer term attachment as well. And do you know what? If you've still got lust after that person, after you have been dating them for a few months or a couple of years or even longer, then you know that you found the right one or the perfect one. Do you know what? You should stop asking yourself the question or setting yourself the goal of finding someone perfect. We're completely imperfect as humans. Let's just accept that you can be perfect together. But in a frame that no one else would actually recognize as being perfect at all, right? I'm completely imperfect, and the person that I'm deeply in love with realizes that's pretty great as well, right?
Well, if everyone took upon that realization, none of us are perfect, and no one's going to perfectly match you.
Exactly.
But if you can perfectly be yourself, it's again going to come back to building that foundation where two of you can jump off from that.
That's right.
So, my 2 cents on accepting lust as it appears, it's two grown-ups having a grown-up conversation, and if that's what it is at the time, and you're both, you can only be accountable for yourself. And be clear in whether or not that's the kind of a relationship that you want to start or solely have. But I encourage you to keep that line of communication open so that if something changes, because for women in particular, it does. Once you are sexually intimate with someone, you are having to fight biology a little bit with the oxytocin that floods you, and you're wanting to attach to that individual. So keep the conversation open. There's nothing wrong with that, but you've got to get that clarity around what it is that you're wanting. So if you are in the search for the right person or the one or whatever language you want to use to describe that individual, then you need to have a conversation first with yourself. Are you going to have those dalliances, and is that setting you in the right direction to potentially meet that individual? And you touched on timing earlier. I think being open to it and deciding fully and being at peace with where you are is a really important first step in dating and romantic relationships, period.
Yeah, I completely agree. But you know what? Let's not chastise ourselves or stop ourselves from having lots of fun. What I will say is this: if you've got lust and you can do that without any stimulation, you know, the things that in our body. And I'm going to challenge everyone. You meet someone and you find them incredibly attractive, and you know that it's going to go down to the point where you might get physical. I challenge anyone to stop, hug that person for 30 seconds, and that's tough, and see how you feel after that hug. Because do you know what? It may come to nothing. You may say thank you very much and walk away. And do you know what? You may hug that person and realize how good that feeling is, and the lust will turn into attraction, which will turn into attachment.
Great. That's great. Any last thoughts? We're in the final days of Valentine's Day, which for a lot of people that are single can be quite stressful. Any last words of advice on how to navigate your way through what can be a very hallmark holiday, or your feelings about Valentine's Day? I hate to put you on the hook here. I know your lady is on the show, but hey, have at her.
I used to work in advertising. Valentine's Day was created by an advertiser. I think it's complete bunk. I think we should walk away from that idea, and we should walk towards the idea that if you love someone, tell that person every day. If you're in a relationship where you can't tell that person every day, maybe it's time to stop and evaluate where you are. And if it can't be fixed, walk away. If it can be fixed, take your time, go through the therapy, start kissing, start hugging. And you know what? That's going to lead you back to somewhere that is really great. I mean, to the point of Jason Silva saying that he's always disappointed of the death of a relationship in the Garden of Eden. Do you know what? There is no Garden of Eden. Nothing's perfect. We're humans. As long as we realize that we're imperfect, and that, you know what, that person that we've chosen to spend some time with, that day's going to be an amazing day. Then I think that's a great foundation to build from.
Yeah, absolutely. I 100% agree. Okay, everyone. Well, we're going to wrap it up for tonight. Nick, thank you so much. I was so looking forward to this conversation, and it's been great to really dig into this topic. If you want to post in the comments there for everybody to see where you can hear and learn more about Nick and what he's up to, you can always find him over on Facebook. The man has a very unique name, so he's not all that hard to find. He also has his website, and you can find him obviously on Twitter as well. And if you want to know a little bit more about what I do, or you're single and you want a unique way to connect with people, you can always find me over at jointhedinnerparty.com, or you can find me on Facebook at The Dinner Party Vancouver. Thanks, everybody. Have an amazing Monday night. I hope it was a wonderful long weekend, which it was for us in BC. And you'll see me next week with Susan McCord, and we're talking about women in dating and the roles and how they shifted, and what's the evolution of dating and what that means for gals out in the world. Thanks again, Nick. We'll see you.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
See you later. Take care. Goodbye, everyone.